Hello my loves, my name is Hannah and welcome to a wrap-up of everything I read in August. So August was actually my best reading month? I don't mean, coincidentally I read the most that I have read of any other month in the year this month, but I'm not talking quantitatively, like in terms of, oh, I read the most pages, although that does happen to be true also because it was the summer holidays. But I feel really good about the books that I read over the summer, so I'm excited to talk to you about them. But fair warning, it is currently the second day of the new academic year. I have had a lot of meetings today. I have had a lot of brain, and I have minimally prepped what I would like to say about each of these books. So if at any point it looks like my brain is grinding to a halt, that is in fact what is happening. That's exactly what's happening. But bear with me, chaps, because some of these books are great. So I will kick off with some stats, but I have not prepped much because academic year overwhelm. So I read 17 books this month, and I'm not that fussed about like numbers of books really, because I read quite a wide variety of like book lengths. But this was the first month, I think, in my Storygraph history ever, so like however long I've been using that app, maybe like 5 years, I think this is the first time I've ever read more than 5,000 pages in a month. So that actually does feel like quite a nice milestone. But I had a fair amount of annual leave to take in August, so I was just off a lot, so I was able to read a little bit more. In terms of stats, all I can really tell you is that I did not read a lot of non-fiction. I did not. Only 2 of the 17 books, I think, were non-fiction, and that is something I want to get better at. I used to be better at prioritising non-fiction. However, that being said, is it possible that having a better reading time corresponds with reading more fiction? Maybe I just don't want to exist in reality right now, guys. Maybe that's true. And then the only other stat that I apparently was interested in this month is the year of publication. So the average year of publication across the 17 books that I read this month was 2013, which is helped by the fact that I read a couple of classics, not full classics, like modern classics, probably like 50s and 60s, because 13 of the 17 books that I read were published in 2023 or 2024. So actually, I think more than any other month, I think that I can recall without having looked at the data, but more than any other month this year, I think I have read like what I would call recent releases, because I count last year as a recent release, all right? To me, that is recent. Frankly, I think anything in the 2020s is a recent release, but you know. So yeah, for me, I think it's quite, that's quite atypical. But now I'm thinking, oh, well, if I feel like I've had a good reading month and I've read a lot of books that were recent, then maybe that tells me something. Or maybe the books were just good. A decent chunk of the books that I read this month were Booker Prize longlisted books, which I think is obviously also the reason that I read so many recent releases. So there will be a lot of Booker chat in this video. I mean, not too much actually. I think I've got 6 to talk to you about in this video. I'm going to kick off by talking about the books that I read as part of my impatient reading for the month. So if you are new here, these are the books that I read as part of an impatient reading vlog series that I do every month, where I pick up a book that I am just excited to read soon, a book that maybe has been on my radar, possibly a book that has been languishing on my shelf, possibly a book that I have had in the back of my mind that I might do some kind of reading project with, but ultimately I haven't done that reading project, but it's a book I'm excited about. So we read those sorts of books in the impatient reading vlogs. So I had 4 books that I read in August as part of that vlog, and I will link the Impatient Reading vlog for August, and actually the playlist of all of them if you're interested in what else I've read in that series. I will link that in the description box down below so you can go and check those out if you want to. No pressure, obviously. So the first book I read, well, it wasn't the first book I read, but the first one I'm going to talk to you about reading is The New Life by Tom Crewe. So this was a bit of a sensation last year. It got a lot of attention. It's a debut historical fiction book, and it is following 2 men, predominantly 2 men, who are writing, they're corresponding through letters because they have similar academic interests on the kind of like liberal social agenda, and they end up collaborating on a book called Sexual Inversion, which was, this is set in the late 19th century, so like the 1890s, and they are collaborating on a book called Sexual Inversion, which was the term at the time that was used for same-sex attraction, and at this time in England, that is illegal for men, not for women, but for men, and one of the men who is collaborating on this book is a gay man who is married with children, and sort of in his 50s, sort of is just, he's, I think, just reached the end of his tether in terms of how long he can stomach being in the closet for, or being not seen. And so the book follows them meeting kind of as sort of like academic pen pals at the start. Oh, the other guy, by the way, is another academic. He has just married a sort of intellectual soulmate. They've got a kind of new, brave vision for what marriage could be based on feminism and a lot more equality between the sexes. And their marriage is also very, very interesting, and kind of forms part of the drama of the book, the emotional drama of the book. But really, we're following those 2 men, their sort of academic and philosophical and political opinions, but also the ramification of those opinions on their personal life and the people in their lives that they love or care for, or are in relationships with, and the difficulty sometimes of living up to your political, philosophical ideals, the various barriers that come into play that stop you being able to do that. I mean, not least for these characters, or at least some of these characters, we have the fact that it is illegal for them to live authentically as themselves. So yeah, and I loved this. It opens with a really quite steamy, illicit sort of sex scene, and it's really like, it really throws you in there, and then it takes quite a sudden departure into a much more kind of cerebral, slower paced book, but then slowly picks back up again. It's probably one of the books that I've enjoyed the most this month, possibly even this year. I think it, without overthinking it too much, it would definitely probably be in a top 20 books I've read. I don't know about top 10 because I'm trying not to think too much about that. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Really strong writing. The difficult relationships and the fullness of each character that was included, I thought was really great, including, and I mentioned this in the vlog, but including characters that have, you know, opinions that we would find really distasteful now, or many of us would find really distasteful now. They aren't just sort of caricatures of homophobic people. It really sort of gets under the skin of like the humanity that also exists in those sorts of opinions, and I think that was very brave and very well done. So I really enjoyed The New Life. Then the next book I read was another queer book, actually, and another debut, which was Neon Roses, not Ghosts. Neon Roses, which I called Neon Ghosts like all the fucking time in that vlog. And this is by Rachel Dawson. And I was excited to read this book for a few reasons. Firstly, Rachel Dawson is a Welsh author, and I have noticed a bit of a blind spot in my reading of Welsh authors. I'm pretty good at reading from Northern Ireland and from Scotland, and obviously, I mean, I am English and I live in England, and there's tons of English authors floating around there, so I definitely read a lot from England. But I had noticed when I was looking at my reading, like, fuck, I haven't read a lot of Welsh books. Or I didn't own a lot of Welsh books. So when my friend Sarah said, do you want to borrow Neon Roses? It's a queer book by a Welsh author. I said, yes, please. And then I found out that it is, if you have seen the film Pride, it is set at the same time as that book. So in that film, it's told from the perspectives of a queer group in London called Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, who in an act of solidarity wanted to raise money and support for the striking miners in the Welsh valleys in the kind of 80s, height of like Thatcher being an arsehole. And the film is told from the perspective of the queer kind of community. So that's the film. But the book is told from the perspective of the Welsh community, the mining community. And our protagonist is a young woman who sort of, she comes from a mining family, as does almost everyone in the village sort of town that she's from. She's got a steady boyfriend that she's had for a really long time. And when this queer group arrive at her village to kind of like show their support for the miners and to drop off all of this money that they've raised, she meets a woman, a lesbian, and self-discoveries are made. And I enjoyed this book, but I didn't love it. I found it did feel a little like a debut at points, particularly in terms of like the neatness of how some of the sort of dramatic incidents happened. I thought sometimes like I wanted things to ripple out a little bit more, but it felt like the narrative kind of like stopped them. And we moved on to the next sort of phase of the book. But I thought the writing was good. I really liked the sort of... I love anything that like centres human solidarity. Like nothing makes me sob like a show of solidarity. So like I enjoyed those sorts of aspects. It wasn't going to be a favourite. And also the timeline of the book doesn't match up entirely with the film. So I thought we were going to have like, if you've seen the film, there's a moment towards the end that's a big show of solidarity, and that's like one sentence in the book. So I think it's unfair of me, but I felt shortchanged by that because I was like, I was so ready to cry and it didn't happen. But yeah. It was good. It was good. I would read other things that Rachel Dawson writes, and I am very glad to have read a Welsh book this month. Then the third book that I read this in the Impatient Reading vlog is quite possibly, it might be my favourite book of the year. It might be. This is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. This is an Irish book, and I picked it up because I had seen both Simon and Louise Savage. So that is Simon Savage at Savage Reads, and his mum, Louise Savage, who also has a YouTube channel talking about books, which I think is Louise Savage Muses. They did a joint video where they were talking about books that might potentially be on the Booker Prize. And this was on there, and I put a library reservation on it because I thought, oh, well, you know, it might be on the long list, and I sort of was planning on checking out the long list this year, and then it wasn't, and for the life of me, I can't work out why. It was so good. This is a historical novel set in 1412 BC in Syracuse on Sicily, and prior to the commencement of the book, the Athenians have tried to invade Sicily and colonize it, and they've failed. And the Athenian prisoners of war are being kept in these kind of disused quarries. And we've got kind of two main characters, Lampo and Gellin. Lampo's our principal, he's our main character really, and Gellin's his like best mate. But Gellin is he's a bit of an artist. He's definitely like he's got the heart of a poet, and he loves theatre. And there's all these Athenians just wasting away in these quarries with no kind of plan for what to do with them. They're literally like starving to death slowly in these quarries. And Gellin wants to go and speak to them to see if any of them have seen any Athenian plays, like, because Athens was kind of like a hotbed of theatre, and particularly he's interested in any plays that are written by his idol Euripides, because what the book captures so well is this idea that obviously like pre-writing or like when writing was like commonly used by people, the only way for someone on Sicily to find out what play is happening or what the story of the play is hoping that someone who's been there to see it crosses their path and can tell them about it. And so it starts with that, of them kind of like asking people, and then it builds into them trying to do like a full-on production of Medea and, oh my goodness, what's the other one? The Women of Troy by Euripides in the quarries. In exchange, and the idea is that the Athenian prisoners would do this in return for kind of food and rations. And I know that it sounds like kind of an out there concept, and it is. And there is a lot of the setup and the kind of like conceit of the narrative that is very funny, and the writing. Ferdia Lennon has just like the classic. If you are a fan of Irish comedians, or if you have Irish people in your life, you will know there is a very particular like humour, and the characters all have that. It's brilliant, and I really, really enjoyed the tone of it. But also it has a lot to say about how easy it is for us to other and dehumanize other people, the incredibly important role that the arts and theatre and writing more broadly can play in helping us understand people whose experiences are very different from our own. And I just loved it. It was one of the most enjoyable things I've read. But there are also like a few moments in this book where my heart just stopped, or like my stomach felt like it was like dropping out my arsehole. It was incredibly stressful at points, and if you take one book recommendation from this video, make it Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. I dare you to not like this book. But also, like, please like this book. It's so good. It's so wonderful. And then the final book that I read in that impatient reading vlog was Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel, which is going to start the talking about the book of books section of this video, because Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel is on the long list for this year's Booker Prize. The reason it was on my impatient reading list is because I had heard about it before, and I did think it sounded like a really cool concept. So this is set at a youth girls boxing tournament in like, can't you remember where in America? I want to say Dust Belt, but like I don't actually think it was. Was it like Reno or Nevada? I don't think it really matters. It might matter to you. It doesn't matter to me. But yeah, it's set at this championship, and each chapter is a different bout of that tournament. So at the start of the book, there's this bracket that shows you it's like this person versus this person, this person versus this person, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then the winners will go through, and then the winners will play. I'm sorry, do you need me to explain the concept of a tournament to you? It's a tournament, and yeah, each chapter is a different bout, and through describing the fight that these two young girls are having in each of the chapters, you learn a lot about who they are. And I think what Rita Bullwinkel does really well is the slippage between past, present, and at latter points in the book as well, future, really seamlessly. Like it felt very natural that you would be 1 minute like in the boxing ring with the characters and someone's just like smashed someone in the face or like dodged something, and it was all very authentically described as, I mean, as someone who like has watched a bit of boxing but like I don't know a lot about it. It felt at once like very technically done, like you could tell she really understood the mechanics of boxing, the psychology of boxing, because it's a hugely psychological sport, obviously, but in a way that made me feel reassured as a reader, but not overwhelmed like I was being given a lot of sports jargon that I didn't understand, and I think that was very impressively done. So far so great. I really enjoyed the first couple of chapters. I think for me, and I said this in the vlog, that it became almost a victim of its own success in terms of that structure, because for me it just got a little bit too repetitive. So I think me not like loving it and maybe getting a little bit bored of that structure is very much a me problem. So if you like the sound of it, I would recommend it. Yeah, let me know if you've read it. I would like people's, I mean, same for like any of these books, but like let me know what you thought about Headshot if you read Headshot, because I would love people's opinion. So then we are getting into Bookerland territory. So first up, I read 2 books by Tommy Orange, because Wandering Stars, which has just come out, is on the Booker Prize long list, but that is a follow-up book to his debut novel, which is There. So I wanted to, I think I was told going into it that you can read Wandering Stars without having read There, for reasons that I will discuss later. I strongly disagree. I strongly disagree that you can read Wandering Stars. I mean, obviously, technically, of course you could read it without reading There, but I think you miss a lot by not having read the first book. So I'm very glad that I did read There first. So let's talk about that. Tommy Orange is a Native American author who grew up in Oakland, in California, and this is a book that is a multi-perspective sort of collage of different people's lives, almost exclusively different Native people's lives of different generations in Oakland, and all of their kind of perspectives and narratives end up like funneling towards this one big moment that happens in the book, and you're kind of like gearing up towards that the whole way through. I think what I liked about it is the writing was absolutely stunning. I think he is a beautiful, on a sentence level, he's a beautiful prose writer. Some of the characters really stood out to me, and I think the way he used those different characters to explore different experiences of growing up with Native heritage or Indigenous heritage, because there are some characters that have very much grown up in that culture. There are some that know that they have that heritage but feel very disconnected to it. And it's a really... When I read an interview with him about this book, he said he wanted to, and it might have, is it in the foreword actually too? But he wanted to write something about like the urban Indian experience. That's the phrasing he uses, like urban Indian, because a lot of sort of native narratives, particularly maybe the sorts of things that come into kind of like popular reading circles, which is not that many books by Indigenous authors, but they tend to be quite rural and kind of maybe historical, and he really wanted to capture something in the contemporary experience in America of these people, and I think that was really well done. What didn't work so much for me was, and again, this is totally personal preference, I struggled to keep track of the characters. And as I was reading it, there were a few characters whose decisions that they make are completely fundamental to a series of events being kind of like kicked off in the book. And I missed what their motives were. And that is, like, I do not doubt now on reflection. At the time I wasn't sure, but I think that was me. I think I missed it. I believe it was in there. Possibly I wasn't reading attentively enough. But either way, the outcome was that I kind of was like, I can see this is happening, but why is this happening? So that kind of got a little bit in the way for me. And oh my god, the ending is just like, it's a mic drop ending. It was whew. So then when I picked up Wandering Stars, I was very interested. So someone had told me that in an ideal world, and obviously kind of the way the books have been published, I guess this doesn't necessarily, I don't know if anyone would bother to do this, but basically Wandering Stars part 1 is like a prequel to They're There. So it's a load of events that happen that explain how go into some of the older characters and a bit more of their backstories, and how they came to be at the point that they are at the start of They're There. And then the second half is picking up after some time the events from that mic drop moment at the end of They're There. And I'm so curious about the decision to structure it like that, and whether or not Tommy Orange knew, and I mean, I could have like researched this, and sorry that I haven't, but whether or not he always intended to revisit this world as a result of having written They're There, or whether it was only with time that he decided to go back and like fill in some blanks. Because part of the reason that this didn't work for me was that it felt like so much of a companion piece to They're There, but I didn't, with those two distinct halves, I didn't feel like it hung together as a narrative in its own right, like as its own book. It felt like appendices to They're There. Now there's nothing wrong with that, and plenty of authors, particularly in other genres like fantasy for example, do that all the time, so I'm not saying that Tommy Orange can't do that. But for me, I just, again, beautiful writing, really carefully observed and well thought through like characters. And this book, even more than the other one, is dealing a lot with addiction, and the opioid crisis and things like that. That really did, it gave it its own, it felt like it had its own focus that was quite distinct from They're There. But it just, for me, felt, I don't know, I felt like it didn't work as a book in its own right, which makes me a little about it being on the Booker, because I do think you can put sequels or prequels or whatever on a prize list. I think that's fine. I'm not saying every book that goes on a prize list has to be a standalone, but actually I think those books do need to work in their own right. And we can disagree about this in the comments if you have strong feelings the other way, but I felt like I did feel like this didn't work as its own book, which makes me really sad, because I think he's such a beautiful writer, and actually, very selfishly, I think I would have just preferred a brand new novel by Tommy Orange than a revisit to this particular world. But it's obviously like it's set like where he is from, so I can understand why he feels like there was more to explore there. There absolutely was. And I think what I would really like, and a couple of people said this, I'm in a group chat on Instagram of lots of people who read the Booker Prize long list every year. And so we kind of like check in with each other there about what people are reading. And someone had said, God, I wish he'd write a non-fiction book. And that's how I felt. because I love the way he says things and I love what he has to say. I just didn't feel like this was necessarily the right canvas for it. But I think I might be an outlier on that, and I am happy to be, because I do think he is a very good writer. But yeah, that was a little bit of a miss for me, Wandering Stars. One that wasn't a miss though was actually the first book on the Booker Prize list that I read this year. And I listened to the audiobook of James by Percival Everett, which is read by Dominic Hoffman. Brilliantly read by Dominic Hoffman, I have to say. And this is a book that is a retelling or a reimagining of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain from the perspective of James, so he's called Jim in Huck Finn, who is an enslaved man. And is sort of, in Huckleberry Finn, it's been a long time since I read that book in my undergrad, I think. But from what I remember of Jim, he is the butt of a lot of jokes in the book, and sort of just generally considered to be there sort of for comic relief as a bit of a fool character. And so Percival Everett has reimagined him as this sort of incredibly switched on, incredibly erudite man who has, despite all of the obvious disadvantages of his experience, taught himself to read and has all sorts of understanding about the world. And philosophy, but who understands that when he is around white people, there is an expectation that he will behave in a certain way and speak in a certain way. And so he, at the opening of the book, he's like instructing the enslaved children where he I was going to say works, but where he is enslaved, in like how to talk like a slave, like how to do slave talk, because he's been teaching them and they're smart and they're eloquent and they talk well, but he's like, no, but you don't say it like that when you talk to like the master, do you? You need to say it like this, so you sound like a slave. And so you follow the story of Huckleberry Finn. It is a really well-paced, fast kind of paced book. And I really enjoyed it. I don't know if it's going to be a favourite. I do think it is like, for me, it is a hard book to find fault with, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it on the shortlist or even win. I actually, from what I've read of the prize list so far, I sort of feel a bit like it is James's to lose. But that is only having read half the long list so far. But yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I really recommend the audio, because so much of it is about it's not about this, but there are so many parts where he's modulating his speech or changing the way he articulates things depending on who he's speaking to, that I actually really recommend the audio. And like I said, Dominic Hoffman did a brilliant job of that. And yeah, I kind of don't have like tons to say about it. I mean, it's infuriating, as you can imagine a narrative like that is. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and I think it would be easy for a book like that to be very earnest, and there is obviously sincerity and authenticity in the book, but it also, there are parts of it that's very funny, which I think is quite true of Huckleberry Finn. It was kind of like, I think he kind of tonally matched elements of it very well, while also sort of eviscerating completely the way those characters are portrayed in Twain's original narrative. And if you're wondering if you need to have read Huckleberry Finn, I really don't think you do. I think you can just go straight into James. If you want, just like read a plot summary of it. I don't think you need to read Huck Finn. And then the only book that I actually have a physical copy of here to show you, because I forgot that I needed to record this video, so I put all my books back and like took my stack of library books back to the library, and was then like, oh, I haven't recorded my wrap up. I need those books, but am I gonna go downstairs and get you a pile of books? No, I'm not. I'm just gonna hold up Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which is the one that is still upstairs, because my partner wants to read it before I get it back to the library. I really loved this book. I would love to see it on the shortlist. I don't think it's going to be on the shortlist. This is a vibes-based book. The plot is... There's no plot. There is no plot to this book. But, you know, she lost the plot anyway, so who wants the plot? Not me. So this is a book that takes place over 24 hours, and if you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you may know that that is like catnip to me. Oh, I love a book that's got a real condensed time frame. And this takes place over 24 hours in space. So we are on a international satellite with a 6-person crew made up of, we've got 2 Russians, we've got 1 Japanese person, 1 English person, 1 American person, and an Italian. And they are on a satellite that is orbiting Earth. And I was not good at physics at school, okay? So I am gonna struggle to explain this. And this was my only thing with this book is that it took me a while to wrap my head around the mechanics of it. It's not that important to your overall enjoyment, but I felt like I needed to understand it. So, here's Earth, and we've got the satellite going around it, and you know, like a spirograph, where like you go over and over and you do multiple circles, but they're always kind of a slightly different permutation. That's basically what this satellite is doing around Earth. So even though it takes place over 24 hours, they make 16 orbits of the Earth in that 24 hours. So they have night and day, 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 because they're moving between the dark and light side of the Earth every time. And they're moving over slightly different parts of the Earth every time they go around. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that. And we are really, each chapter is called like Orbit 1, or sometimes it's like Orbit 1 ascending, Orbit 2 descending. So you might get 2 chapters for one orbit, like a going up and then a coming back down. And you're basically just following the crew around for 24 hours. And you're existing inside their heads. Some of them have been there, I think, for like 3 months. Some of them have been there for about 6 months. You're finding out a bit like Headshot, actually. You're finding out kind of what brought them here, what drew them to kind of space travel, space exploration. And so it is it's an experience. And I think if you can, reading it in like one go, I couldn't manage that just because of time, but I imagine that would be a very cool way to read it if you just want to like sit down on an afternoon and just read the whole lot and feel like you're kind of going through it with them. But it's a book that's really about... Their position is so interesting because they are looking at all of humanity. So they're constantly being pulled back to like the observation deck. So they're all going about, they're busy, they've got like chores and chores and chores and chores and chores to do. Loads of stuff that's just to do with like the upkeep and the various like experiments that they're running and the things that they're like doing. And there's a typhoon that's brewing off the coast of Asia, like Southeast Asia. I can't remember exactly which country it hits now, but yeah, there's a typhoon brewing and they're sort of like watching it every time they go past it. It's getting like slightly closer to land. So they're kind of looking at it all from a distance. And I thought it was so clever. It was so thoroughly researched. Again, a bit like Headshot. I think like you could clearly tell that Samantha Harvey had put her work in to make sure that what she was writing about was like true and like authentic to like that experience. And so it is literally an otherworldly book. It feels, you feel like you are above the book sometimes and held a bit at a distance, but I thought it was so effective and evocative. And shall I read you a bit? So this, for example, right,
They were warned in their training about the problem of dissonance. They were warned about what would happen with repeated exposure to this seamless earth. You will see, they were told, its fullness, its absence of borders except those between land and sea. You'll see no countries, just a rolling, indivisible globe which knows no possibility of separation, let alone war. And you'll feel yourself pulled in two directions at once. Exhilaration, anxiety, rapture, depression, tenderness, anger, hope, despair. Because of course you know that war abounds and that borders are something that people will kill and die for. While up here there might be the small and distant rocking of land that tells of a mountain range, and there might be a vein that suggests a great river, but that's where it ends. There's no wall or barrier, no tribes, no war or corruption, or particular cause for fear. Before long, for all of them, a desire takes hold. It's the desire, no, the need, fueled by fervour, to protect this huge yet tiny earth, this thing of such miraculous and bizarre loveliness, this thing that is, given the poor choice of alternatives, so unmistakably home, an unbounded place, a suspended jewel so shockingly bright. Can humans not find peace with one another, with the earth? It's not a fond wish, but a fretful demand. Can we not stop tyrannising and destroying and ransacking and squandering this one thing on which our lives depend? Yet they hear the news and they've lived their lives and their hope does not make them naive. So what do? What action to take and what use of words? They're humans with a godly view, and that's the blessing and also the curse. And like, I feel like that bit really does capture this sort of like, on the one hand, they're incredibly aware of like their ordinariness and this incredibly privileged position that they're in, but also the disconnect that they feel from the earth, as well as this huge sense of connection that they have. And I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really, really good. I'm rabbiting on a bit, sorry. I need to pick up the pace a bit, don't I? Right. Next space themed book. We have Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. So this, again, another Booker Prize nominated book, and I really enjoyed this one. This is a sort of, it's an unusual book in the sense that I went on a bit of a journey with it. At the start, I really didn't think I was going to like it. And in the middle, it got me and it lost me again a little bit. And then at the end, I was like, oh no, it's a masterpiece. So, and it's one that it is covering a lot. So, which strands to pick out first? So we are following, our main character is a man, we've got, God, this is what happens when she gets in her own head about needing to go quickly. Right. It begins in, I think, like either the late 80s or early 90s. Possibly the mid-90s. Not important. And we are following a journalist who works for a small Essex paper. And his boss is looking to kind of like pep up his column a little bit, try and entice new viewers. And there is this big comet coming. Comet or supermoon or something. There's some kind of like astronomical marvel that's supposed to be happening. So he's like, could you just like go and maybe write a column about the stars? Because this whole thing's happening. And this becomes a bit of a springboard for the journalist, and he ends up getting really, really, really into astronomy. And linked to that, he ends up researching a local woman, or a woman who moved to Essex from mainland Europe, and who disappeared, or who used to live there. So they've basically got, you know, like kind of like a National Trust property, but not National Trust. Like there's like a fancy estate in the town that he lives in, and they know that there was this woman that was there and that she disappeared, and ends up being linked to this ongoing kind of mystery. Various characters get pulled into it. He meets a man who is a bit younger than him, and he falls sort of desperately in love with him. Our main character is a gay man who is also a very religious man, and for various reasons has chosen to not live out and authentically. He talks about the fact that he at one point in his life he was planning on sort of leaving the church, leaving his family, leaving his life in Essex and going off to London and being gay. And then this man came into his church and brought his newborn baby, whose mother had just died in childbirth, and this guy doesn't know really what happened, but he looked at that child and thought, oh fuck, I can't leave. I need like he feels this sort of huge amount of attachment to this baby, who then grows up to be this girl and young woman that he has a kind of pseudo paternal relationship with. And it's a hard book to talk about in terms of like, there are so many layers and things that go on. So it is part mystery because it is partly about uncovering what happened to this woman. It is also this like deeply sad narrative about a man who has not given himself the gift of living his own life, and doesn't feel like he is being given the thanks that he deserves for what he has given up in order to stay in the church. There is a lot about his relationship with stargazing and religion, and it is, I think it took Sarah Perry a really long time to write, and I can see why. At points, the narrative, I felt like I wasn't sure where it was going. But just at the point where I feel like she was losing me, she got me back again. So it was interesting because that in a way is sort of like, throughout the book you've got this returning comet that keeps coming back and that signals the passing of time. And in some ways it was like that. My reading experience was like that kind of like motion, that orbiting motion of like feeling like I was just getting out and then being like pulled back in by the kind of like the gravity of the prose, I guess, if you'll forgive like a really like wanky metaphor. But yeah, I thought it's just my first Sarah Perry. I know The Essex Serpent made a big splash when she published that, but I've never read that. I am interested to go back and read more. I think she's a beautiful prose writer. I really resonated really a lot with the themes of the book. I actually think I read Enlightenment and The New Life at kind of similar times, and it was really sad. I think I mentioned it because I talk about this book more in my like weekly reading blog that I did in August. And The New Life is about sort of people not being able to, like, the ways in which those men were not, or some of those men were not being able to like live authentically. And so in Enlightenment it's even sadder because technically he can, and yet there are still kind of like social, personal, political barriers to him feeling like he can do that. And so yeah, I thought it was really, really good. With Orbital and James, definitely some of they're probably my three favourites that I've read so far. And then the last one on the Book of Prose list is Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. So this is a oh my god. There is a reviewer on Instagram called, I'll put his link down below. It's something like GY Golden Retriever Reviews or Golden Reviews or something. And all of his book reviews have pictures of his golden retrievers in. But he said that he's come up with a subgenre of Irish fiction called crack cocaine. That's crack spelled as in, are you up for the crack? Like CRAIC. And it feels like such a perfect description of these sorts of books. This is in the same sort of vein as The Bee Sting from the long list last year. So this is set in contemporary Ireland and is looking at sort of rural ish crime. We are following a young man whose house is used by the local sort of criminal racket, normally to kind of store stuff, drugs, cash, that sort of thing. And so he's not really like involved. He's just kind of one of those like young vulnerable adults that end up getting kind of taken advantage of by sort of criminal outfits. And he's done that in the past. And at the start of the book, two enforcers come, and this time they have kidnapped someone. They've kidnapped the younger brother of a man who owes them money. And this book is set over a long weekend, so it is another kind of short timeline. And we sort of uncover, it's like a literary crime sort of thriller. It's a lot about family, and also I wished it was more about the socioeconomic conditions that allow or that propagate some of these sorts of issues that come up in the book. That wasn't dealt with as much as I would have liked. This is a funny one because I liked it. I listened to this on audio, and it was read by, I didn't write the guy's name down. Aidan someone, I'll put it on the screen. And he did a brilliant job of the audiobook. I mean, I love Irish accents. My nana was Irish, so I always have like a real like fondness for the accent. And so anytime there's an option to like listen to an Irish book, I will do that. So I thought it was good. But for the life of me, lads, I don't know what it's doing on the Booker Prize list. For me, it felt like an enjoyable literary fiction book, like Carla or that sort of thing, and it was good. I didn't feel like it was. There was some brilliant character studies. He's got a real wit. I think he's predominantly a short story writer, and I think some of the like real like economies of language and the really like impactful kind of short descriptions of people is a skill that he's probably got for being a short story writer, and I think that was really well done. I just don't really feel like it was like one of the 13 best books that were written in English this year. It's one of the ones where I'm like, I don't know why this was on the prize list and not Glorious Exploits, for example. So yeah, I kind of like, I liked it. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it hadn't been longlisted. Like if it was just a book that I'd come across that someone had said, this is a cool Irish like literary crime book, I would have probably listened to it and had a perfectly good time. And I do think sometimes like I feel for books sometimes when they're on these really big prize lists, because I feel like people's expectations of them are then like through the roof. So I'm acknowledging that has possibly also come into play on my enjoyment. But if you were just looking for like something like Carla or The Bee Sting, if you enjoyed either of those books, you probably enjoyed Wild Houses. I enjoyed it. I just don't really think I don't think it deserves a spot on the long list, and that makes me feel like a mean person. That is the end of the Booker Prize. I don't know if I'm definitely not going to be able to read the rest of them before the shortlist is announced. In my head, the shortlist is announced in October. It's definitely not. It's announced in like 2 weeks. And I hate this about prize lists. Can I just have a tiny moan? Playground by Richard Powers isn't even out for like 9 days after the shortlist is announced. I find it so annoying that there's so much overlap. Like there's always like a couple of books, because I think Creation Lake only came out this week, or is only coming out this week. And I get it, but I'm like, could you not just change the months that are like
for books to qualify. I mean, I know they can't now because we end up losing some months, but it's really annoying to me that like those of us who aren't getting sent like review copies or like advanced reader copies of these books literally can't read along with the prize list, because there is actually no way in hell, like I can't get hold of that book until after the shortlist is announced, and I'm grumpy about that. I feel like it stops the prize feeling like an accessible thing that like normal readers can kind of read along with. But I'm also aware that I'm in a like middle ground of like most people don't create content about their reading on the internet, so like don't give a shit. Maybe this is just a me problem, but it's annoying. I am annoyed by it. The next couple of books I'm going to talk to you about are those modern classics that I mentioned. So the first was an audiobook that I listened to, and I've been meaning to listen to this for a really long time after Ariel on Books Unbound read it, and it is True Grit by Charles Portis, which was read by Donna Tartt, of all the authors, and she also has an afterword on the audiobook edition, because she's talking about how True Grit's a really unusual book in her experience, because like every single member of her family really loves it, and they have very like divergent reading tastes, and I can see why. This is a Western, which is not a genre that I've really spent any time reading or considering at all. And yeah, I can see why people read this book and then it starts them on a bit of a now I must read Westerns all the time kind of journey, because I absolutely love this. We're following a young girl whose father has just been killed by a thief, and she takes it upon herself. Is she 14 or is she 12? She's in that age bracket, 12 to 14, and she goes on a journey to get vengeance for her father's murder, and it's brilliant. It's like tight and slick and pacey, but it's very, very funny. I think it is very rare that like an adult male author could capture a young girl's voice this authentically. And I thought it was brilliant. It really conjured the world. I thought the characters were great, and Donna Tartt does a fantastic job reading it. So I don't have tons and tons to say. I think I did talk about it a little bit more extensively in my August weekly vlog. So you can check that out if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about it. But yeah, I'm just one more voice in the chorus of people saying, wow, True Grit's really good. True Grit's really good. And then the second one I read is a Russian modern classic called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which is translated from the Russian by Clarence Brown. And this was on my radar for two reasons. The more popular one is that this is largely cited as the book that inspired George Orwell to write 1984. And the other thing is that the author spent some time in the northeast of England, where I live, particularly around the shipyards, which are like not even half a mile that way from my house. Where, you know, Tyneside was a big shipbuilding location in the UK, along with Liverpool, along with Belfast, for example. So we built a lot of ships, and we wondered, my partner and I had speculated on whether or not any of the kind of imagery, because we knew this was a dystopian book, or sort of a utopian dystopia. And whether or not any of the kind of like imagery or skylines or any of the kind of like northeast shipyards would like bleed into the book, and it doesn't really. But I still found it fun reading a book where I knew that at least the author had kind of like set foot in the area. And yeah, this is I really enjoyed the reading experience of this. It is a hard one to describe, and I talk about it more in, was it my July? I think it was my July one, because I read this quite early in August. So I think I started reading it in my July weekly reading diary vlog thing that I do. And it is about, so we're living in this sort of society that is presented as a utopia. It is a totalitarian utopia that's very ordered, and everyone is very happy with the way things are. It's wonderful. And then they are getting ready. Our main character is an engineer on a kind of a crew who are building a rocket because they want to send the good message of their way of life to potential other places. So the government have asked them to kind of write testimonies, like witness testimonies almost, of who they are and how they live, that will form part of like this catalogue. You know, like when we send stuff up into space that's got like some music in and like books that humans have written in various languages to be like, we're humans and we exist. They're doing that. And so each chapter is an extract, a testimony that this one main character is writing. And over the course of the book, things happen that unsettle his opinions, that disrupt his way of thinking, because they are very anti-individualist. They've got a very kind of community minded, and so, you know, given the history of this was written, I think it was written in the 1910s, 1920s, but translated into English, I think this edition in the 50s. But given kind of Russia's political history, you know, it was clearly ciphers for communism in there too, and I enjoyed it. It hasn't stuck with me in a way. I'm struggling to talk to you about it because actually a lot of it hasn't stayed with me, but I did enjoy it, and I think it is a really great like read if you like things like 1984 and you're interested in that sort of like in reading some more kind of like modern classics that are dealing with similar things. I remember enjoying reading it, but for some reason it's not stuck with me as much. And then moving into just general contemporary literature, not prize nominated, that I have read this month. The first one was Butter by Asako Yuzuki, which was translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton, and I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by the author Hanako Footman. So this, I feel like this is quite a buzzy book, and you will probably have heard people reviewing it, talking about it elsewhere. But in case you don't know, it is a sort of literary crime food book. So there is a woman called Miniko Kaji. The only problem with listening to the audiobook and not having a physical copy is that, like, if I've not read anyone's name, it's really hard to keep people's names in my head. So I can't remember what any of these characters are called. But there's a woman who is currently in prison for a series of murders, and she is accused of having sort of killed her lovers, but kind of a roundabout way, because she allegedly kind of seduces them with her domesticity, and then they've all died in slightly different circumstances that all could be coincidental, but the fact that they've all died is deeply suspicious. And she's like a big kind of cult figure in Japan, and our main character is a young journalist who desperately wants to interview her. She wants to get an exclusive interview with this woman because she's got a retrial coming up, and she, you know, wants to excel at work, and so she
she tries to get an interview with her, and the way that she sort of tries to woo this woman is because she knows she is a big foodie. She starts talking to her about food and recipes, and so she ends up having this sort of slightly, like, I was going to say parasocial, but it's not really parasocial, but the inmate, the woman who's accused of murder, ends up sort of living vicariously through the food experiences of the journalist. And it's a tricky one, this book, because there was a lot in it that I enjoyed and liked. The food descriptions, firstly, unreal. Like, oh my god, I wanted to eat absolutely everything. We are about to book a holiday to Japan, and this book made me so excited for eating in Japan. But for me, it felt a little bit like there were too many things going on in this book. It's quite long. I think the audiobook was like 17 hours long. And there was a point where I felt like the book was finished and there was still 2 hours to go on the audiobook. And for me, it felt like a little bit like it was trying to do too much in one go. It felt like it couldn't decide if it was a crime book with some food in it or like a foodie kind of book with like a fun element of crime. And because that balance wasn't, because it felt like she was trying to hold them in tension and give them like equal weight, but actually it just meant that they were kind of neither of them. And there was like whole storylines with like different other characters in her life, and then we go into the details on that and about her career and her relationships and one of her friends, and then this older guy that she's working with, and it just felt like messy, and it felt like it didn't come together. And then the ending just felt like this incredibly drawn out sort of, now I'm telling you what the point of the story was. And I'm like, yeah, I'd actually understood that. Thank you so much. So yeah, and also there's so much fat phobia in this book. Now, it is criticised in the book. It is intentionally there to be criticised, but oh man, it was not fun to read. Like, and it would just get my back up every time it was like mentioned, anytime someone's like size was mentioned or whatever, and it just, yeah. But there were interesting themes being explored around working culture, around feminism and domesticity, that was really interesting. There was some ideas that she's kind of playing with that reminded me a bit of some of the conversations in Small Fires, which was a really great experimental kind of non-fiction book about cooking that I read. And yeah, like the food stuff was great. It felt a little bit like the book didn't really know what it was and was trying to be like all things in all directions, and therefore felt quite messy to me. So we had that. And then we had a historical fiction book called Once a Monster by Robert Dinsdale. This is a myth retelling of the Minotaur, reimagined in Victorian London. And so the Minotaur, the conceit is almost that like this guy is the Minotaur from Theseus and the Minotaur, but that he keeps sort of getting like reborn and revived and shaped by society until he's become much more human than he would have been when he literally had the head of a cow. But he is still, physically very different to a lot of human beings. And it's sort of about him and his relationship with this young girl who's a mudlark, so one of the kids that like dredges stuff out of the Thames to try and sell. Very like Artful Dodger coded. And I sort of like, I really wanted to like this, not least because my best friend gave me this book, but only because she knows I love a myth retelling, and it does sound like a cool kind of like reframing of that. And I haven't read a lot of like Minotaur
retellings. And I think there were some interesting ideas in there, obviously, about humanity and what makes humans monstrous, and you know, how it's not what we think it makes, but the metaphors were quite clear about what the author was kind of intending to communicate. I found it quite long, like a bit overly long, and I kind of was like, not a favourite, and probably not an author that I would be like running to reread anything else by him. But like, if you like Victorian settings and you want a kind of a different vibe of a myth retelling, like, it's worth giving it a go. It is quite slow paced and a little swampy at points. Mean. Oh, I'm mean today. What I'm not going to be mean about, though, is the next book, which was Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. So this is the first Elizabeth Strout that I have read. And I had a major wobble right at the start, because I wanted to read some Elizabeth Strout. I knew that most, if not all, of her books all exist in the same universe, and that various characters kind of crop up, but that there's no strict order that you need to read her books in. And I know she's most well known for the Lucy Barton series. But my reading twin, Evie, had said, I like Lucy Barton, but Olive Kitteridge is my favourite. So I was like, well, I'm going to start with Olive Kitteridge if that's what Evie says. And I didn't know that this is interconnected short stories. Well, is it? I would say it is, but each of the stories in some ways relates to the main character, Olive Kitteridge, and so you get these different angles into her life, covering, I think, like 30 or 40 years of her life. And at first I was like, oh no, these are short stories. But you know what? In this format, because I knew that they were all there to tell me something about this central person, and there was this very clear thread through, I really enjoyed it. Yay! So maybe I can do this style of short story collection. If you've got any other ones that are specifically like this, I want them like the same person. I will accept the same family if I must, but I would like it to be the same person if possible. Olive is a great character because she's a real kind of cantankerous. In the UK, the way that I think she would be commonly described is like a battle axe. She's just this like forthright woman who says what she says. She's not really interested in protecting anyone's feelings. She kind of steamrolls through life. But she's also deeply, deeply vulnerable at moments. And the different angles that her relationship with her son is seen as, for example, and her relationship with her husband, you really build up this sort of really quite profound sort of kaleidoscope of her life in a way that couldn't be achieved, I don't think, in a standard novel. At least a novel that isn't like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long. And so for that reason, I thought that the form of the book really worked for what she was trying to do. And it's basically like, it's just a series of really good short stories set in this tiny, like, New England town, following this seemingly very ordinary but slightly severe woman who used to be a maths teacher, and looking at different characters' lives, and in some of the stories she's very much one of the main characters in it, and then in other stories she's just like a mention because it's just something that's going on over here. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing how this fits into, because I think the Lucy Barton ones are novels, right? So I'm interested to see how
they all kind of like, all of that coalesces into kind of one world. But short stories that I enjoyed. Yay! And now finally, and I will be brief because both of these books I talk about in my August weekly reading video. These are the 2 non-fiction books I read this month. So, firstly, we've got Word Monkey by Christopher Fowler, which was read by Sean Pertwee, and this is a memoir by Christopher Fowler, who was a kind of a commercial fiction author, really quite prolific commercial fiction author, who I hadn't actually read any of his work, but I saw this on Everett and I recognised it as being on the Polari Prize list this year. And this is a really, it's a really sad memoir to read, because it is basically about, it started off being the book that Christopher Fowler always wanted to write about writing. And he says at the start that every time he's sat down to try and write a book about writing, something in his life has gone wrong that has derailed that intention. And that happens again when he receives a terminal cancer diagnosis after starting writing this book. So it is a book both about writing craft, his relationship with writing, how he got into writing, some of the stories that he's written, but it is also his experience of receiving that terminal cancer diagnosis and attempting to kind of come to terms with that. And it was published posthumously. He did die earlier this year, I think, or possibly last year. And his husband kind of like pulled together his writing and helped get it published. And I think because of that, it's quite an eclectic book in that it does jump around quite a lot. So you'll have like a lot about like his illness, and then you'll have like some really short, sharp, really funny, he's very funny, bits about like writing, and he talks about, you know, like Agatha Christie at points, and he's talking about like other writers and things like that. Because of that, I think although the narrator does a brilliant job, I think it would work better as a physical book that you could kind of almost like flip between whether you wanted to read some bits about writing or whether you wanted the more kind of like memoir coded bits. That might maybe like work a little bit better. So that was Word Monkey. And the final book I read is a book that has been taking me a really long time, but that I did really enjoy, called On Looking by Alexandra Horowitz. And I talk about this in that weekly reading blog. But this is a book that is basically, Alexandra Horowitz is a science writer, an animal behaviourist, and an author, and she was taking her dog for walks around the block and sort of feeling like it was kind of like a boring walk for her to be on. Like, you're just kind of like milling around like streets. She lives in New York, so you're just kind of like walking on like pavements and stuff and getting a bit bored by it. And then she decides to conduct this experiment where she goes on a walk around the block with 11 different people who all have very particular perspectives or specialisms, and she tries to see the world through their eyes. So one of them is her toddler, her son, and she just sort of really gets into like looking at what he's looking at and trying to like find the interest in what he finds the interest in. And then there's other ones that are like I can't remember the scientific word for it, but someone who knows a lot about insects. That. And also like a sound designer who is able to like talk about all of the different sounds that are happening. And so each chapter is a different walk that you're going on. And I read this really slowly because it became just like a really nice bedtime reading book for me. So the fact that it took me over a month to read isn't actually like, it's not a criticism of the book. It's not because I didn't want to read it. It was good bedtime vibes for me because like nothing overly stressful or like anxiety inducing was happening. So I kind of recommend it if you're looking for like a gentle non-fiction book. But you could also like, it's just really charming to hear from lots of people about their special interests and how that colours how they perceive the world. It was so interesting. And yeah. Wow, this has been long and I'm so sorry. Maybe I shouldn't read over 5,000 pages next month. I don't think I will. It's September. I'm not gonna...
If I read 3,000 pages in September, I will be doing well, I think. But I would love to know, if you are still here, God love you. If you are still here, I would love to know what you read this month. What was your standout book? Have you been reading any of the Booker prize lists or any kind of prize list? If you're not a Bookery person, are you at Women's Prize? Are you at Polari Prize? Are you at Jalak Prize? Talk to me about your prize reading. And I will see you next week for a mystery video that I haven't decided what it is yet. So thank you very much. If you have enjoyed this video, do give it a little thumbs up. That would be very kind. And if you're still here and you haven't subscribed to my channel and you want to hear me wittering on ad nauseum several more times, then you should subscribe to my channel and come hang out for future ramblings. Bye.